Hello, team, and welcome to part two of the Ukraine war news update. Due to the length of the video, I split it into two. Let's go straight to the front line. That's where we've got to, and give you a quick synopsis of what's going on the front lines. Just a couple of general comments. Minefields are the biggest obstacle to Ukraine's counteroffensive, says the Washington Post. That is indeed obviously true. I mean, I've talked about this an awful lot recently. That's why Ukraine's military strategy changed from using infantry vehicles and tanks to advancing cautiously on foot. A need for a more remote mine clearance equipment and fighter jets emerged. Yet, I talked earlier in part one of this video that they've changed their tactics and they're now taking out the artillery behind the front lines. Well, at the same time, doing that allows them, as they move very much more slowly forward, they can then take time to rid themselves of the mines and minefields. So that is still, one reason why they're slowing down, but it's also because of artillery. So in the time it takes to take out the artillery, they can also hopefully take out mines as well. Now, a piece well worth reading in the Times: Ukrainian counteroffensive. We take their trenches, but they take them back. Just a couple of bits to pick from this. Ukrainians do not speak well of their enemy under any circumstances, but there was a touch of awe in the officer's voice as he recounted how the Russians sucked up everything thrown at them, even after they were surrounded. This is just one anecdote. Quote, "They must have lost 100 men," he said. "We poured in shells, heavy artillery, everything. They still kept going." So this is very different to Kharkiv, where they kind of split and ran, the Russians, and there was a bit of a rout and a thunder road. This is attritional, very slow, and the Russians are just defending to the last man. And yeah, this is obviously making things very much slower for the Ukrainian advance. Also, much more attritional for the Russians as well. You would think it will lead to them losing much higher numbers of casualties. In Novodarivka, the Russian outpost eventually fell into Ukrainian hands. I mean, this is talking about that that sector, but it's finishing off the article here. And the front moved forward, but there has been no mass breakthrough. Quote, "We shelled their lines and forced them to fall back, and our infantry take over their trenches," he said. Then the Russians bombard the same trenches, and it's our infantry's turn to fall back. So this is forward and backwards. I mean, this is happening even in Bakhmut, in Bakivka, where they're going into Bakivka, getting forced back out of Bakivka, going back into Bakivka, getting forced back out. And that's happened over the last few weeks. And that's not this kind of trench line fighting with, in the agricultural fields of Zaporizhia. The infantry officer at the Russian outpost was even less sanguine. The Russians were regrouping, he said. Sources talk of a Russian build-up in the southwest of the front. Our job is to hold the line, the officer said. Now, something I didn't mention is that there are rumors that in the Kupiansk front line, which is the area where the Russians are kind of doing the best at the moment, Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea, there are talks that the Russians may have 120, may have 180,000 troops. Now, of course, that's not going to be frontline troops. It's going to include all of your troops behind the lines. A lot of them will be logistics, artillery, so on and so forth. It's not like 180,000 people to just throw in one big charge. That's not at all the case. However, the point is that they have built up a lot of forces along that axis for a long time, and there could be a major offensive brewing from the Russians to dislodge the Ukrainians' attempted counteroffensive. Don't know, but those are just some of the rumors, right? A lot of talks about Kupiansk. There's no reports. Yes, Russians do attack in the area, mainly north of Kupiansk, near Liman Pershi, which was always Russian dominant grey zone, and Pershi Trevnevi. Apart from Mazyativka, no further gains are made yet, monitoring the situation. So I don't know if that's reporting too much, just that there is activity in that area. Bakhmut Demon, who is operating as a soldier in the Bakhmut area, we have extremely good success in Kurdimivka. Might indicate that the assault south of Klishchivka towards Andriivka, are going well. In addition, Osman, the volunteer for the 24th ADAR Battalion, confirms the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade did a good job today. That's yesterday. 3rd Separate Assault Brigade did a good job today. Organisation, coordination, and efficiency at the highest level. Basically, it means that there is success certainly to the south of Bakhmut. Peter Clifford Online says today's news update: Ukrainian troops continue to advance south of Bakhmut, progressing along the canal towards Klishivka and Andrivka villages. So that is a general kind of synopsis that things are going fairly well. Russians are bringing in reinforcements to the Klishivka Andrivka Kurdimivka line. It won't help them. Ukraine literally controls all the heights and strategical points, shooting fish in a barrel. And I've talked about how the Ukrainians might not advance much further around Klishivka. They might not advance into Klishivka, but wait for the Russians to pull out of there. They have got the advantage in the heights. They can just keep hammering the Russians. It's not a case of, yes, as eventually they want the territorial gain, but they don't want to lose their own troops. And if they can take Klishivka with minimal losses by just sitting on the heights and hammering the Russians, then that's the most sensible thing for them to do. Another update here. This is coming from War Gonzo, who is alive, it appears. Ukrainians attacked east of the so the M18 and the E10 or E105 east of Kamyanska and took up new important positions. So Kamyanska is by the eastern edge of the Kakhovka Reservoir, as it was, the Zaporizhia Reservoir. And that is on the very western point of the Zaporizhia front line. So Ukrainians might be having some success around there. Ukrainians advance along the railway west of Dorozhnyanka, which is south of Halyplay. That's kind of midway along that Zaporizhia front line. And the Ukrainians took several positions southwest of Pavlivka, aiming for Yehorivka, which is, by Vuhledar. So that, as you can see, three areas right along the Zaporizhia and Donetsk southern front line that indicate that Ukrainians could be having some success. Now, there's a lot of talk about Staromayorska today in the Velika Novosilka axis. So this came out before today's claims. So this is yesterday's claims. A Ukrainian attack on Urizhina did not work out. Coming from the eastern flank, an attack going around the town was repelled. Reportedly, Russian troops managed to take advantage of the grey zone around Novodonetsk, making Ukrainian positions unfavorable to hold. So you're thinking, oh, okay, not great. And then today, there are lots of claims saying that Staromyorsk has been sort of liberated or it's under control of the Ukrainians. So Gherkin claims that so this is evil Gherkin, claiming that Ukrainian defense forces are taking positions in Staromyorsk, a contested territory in the Berdyansk direction for the past month. However, the only trustworthy source of the Ukrainian army has not spoken about it yet. So we are likely to see more conflicting messages in the nearest future until the information is confirmed or refuted. But it's not just from Gherkin that we're hearing this. Here is Romanov, who says, and in fact, I think if I got another one, Russian mill blogger Romanov reports that Staromyorska, south of Velika Novosilka, is under the control of Ukrainian forces. Several days ago, we reported that Ukrainians had indeed entered the outskirts and fighting was ongoing. We are waiting for the visual confirmation. Andrew Perpetua says, Romanov claims that, yep. He said that's a town, Staromyorsk is a town that's had intense shelling. I mean, really focuses on intense there, shelling around it over the past 3 days. So what Andrew Perpetua does with his mapping is a lot of satellite imagery of shelling to see where the activity is happening and thereby drawing conclusions on where the front lines are, because front lines are where shelling is going to be happening. So he knows that that's a place where the Ukrainians are massively attacking at the moment. So he says the previous position was assaulting the town. In other words, it fits in line with what Andrew Perpetua already knows. And then Radu Hosu, who's this Romanian source, he's actually in Kherson at the moment. I've asked him if he can do an interview. I hope he gets hold of that. He gives an update on the front line, saying a lot of the same kind of stuff. The Ukrainians have entered Staromyorsk and Novodonetsk, which is to the east of Staromyorsk. But he talks about what is happening in Kherson, and he says he's seen it with his own eyes because he's there. That the Ukrainians have crossed the Dnieper towards Oleshki. The Ukrainians are preparing things in Oleshki and southwest of Oleshki, but plans love silence. So I will stop there because there are things I've seen with my own eyes. So this then goes back, when you piece together little kind of hints like this, you're thinking, okay, possibly something in Kherson could well happen. Something across the Dnieper could be an intention for the Ukrainians. There were rumors of amassed troops to the west of the Dnipro River, and that was confirmed by both Russian and Ukrainian sources. So everything, all the ducks do seem to be lining up for an attack to take place across the Dnipro River. Quite how they'll do that in terms of managing to get large amounts of mechanized equipment across it, I don't know. Anyway, so things are happening on the front line. You get the point. Check out my Frontline update for more details on that later. Um, and going on to military aid, South and other aid, South Korea is to increase its aid to $150 million. So I did report on this yesterday. There's confirmation of this. So the Yoon Suk Yeol, the South Korean president, was with his wife in Kiev. They visited a few times, I think, or certainly the wife's been there, I think, before, possibly. Can't quite remember. But anyway, this is significant. They're going to help, I think, in terms with the ramifications of the Novokhovka or the Kakhovka Dam being destroyed and the humanitarian assistance there with reconstructing. Last year, South Korea's arms exports rose 140%, says this source, to a record $17.3 billion, including deals worth $12.4 billion to sell tanks, howitzers, fighter jets, and multiple rocket launches to Poland, one of Ukraine's closest allies. South Korea is a major arms exporter and a country Ukraine wants to have a good relation with. So this is while they are still, as of yet, not selling Ukraine arms directly. As I said before, they are selling lots of other nations arms, and those nations, like Poland and like the US with ammunition, can then give Ukraine their stocks. So it's functionally the same thing. And that's really important. South Korea have been, waltzing up the arms export ladder for a number of years now. They are constantly at war with North Korea, which means they have a very active defense industry that is able to operate at scale, manufacture at scale, and that gives them this competitive advantage in terms of unit costs coming down of individual pieces while still being comparative to, say, stuff that Rheinmetall or the Germans are producing. They can produce similar kind of stuff but cheaper, and that's placing them in a good position. Then they go for the model that means that if you buy their tanks, you can buy like the first 50 buy straight off South Korea, and then they give you licensing permission to indigenously construct those. So obviously there's still this continued money going to South Korea, but you're able to employ your local workers, and money stays within your own country to some degree. And that's a really sustainable business model for both South Korea and the country in question. So really, really good, I think, way of doing business. The government of Serbia has allocated humanitarian aid to Ukraine to overcome the humanitarian disaster in the Kherson region after the explosion of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. So Serbia is one of these places that is kind of, to some degree, very supportive of Russia, very close connections with Russia, and has a lot of meddling in Serbia, a lot of Russian money and intelligence work and fifth generation warfare taking place within Serbia. So I mean, it's good to see this for sure. I don't know how much pressure there on, in terms of surrounding European nations, the EU, and so on and so forth, to do the right thing here, or how much of this is them just doing the right thing off their own back. But certainly good. And as I've said before, it doesn't matter that all nations, like, Switzerland and Austria aren't providing weapons to Ukraine where they could provide weapons. But if the end result is the same, it doesn't really matter. So if you say, right, okay, the US are going to provide the weapons that you guys don't provide, but you guys then need to provide loads of humanitarian aid, so the US doesn't have to provide that. And 2 + 2 = 4, right? And 1 + 3 = 4. So as long as we get to 4, then happy days. As long as it's not 4 + 0. So, do you know what I mean? Like, you do the humanitarian stuff and the demining stuff, and we'll concentrate on the howitzers and the gimlets and whatever. And Ukraine get what they need at the end of the day. Right. US, and I talked about this yesterday. US is buying old Hawk surface-to-air missile systems off Taiwan. That obviously Taiwan are upgrading to a point they need better stuff than that, but it's still usable, decent enough stuff. It is old. These are around before the Vietnam War, but they have been consistently upgraded, and they can be plugged in, one would assume, to the NATO systems. So US are buying these back off Taiwan and getting these to Ukraine. I heard there were 13 systems and then more radar parts to that. But here, the source Ukraine Batmap says the USA is set to acquire 23 Hawk air defense systems. I don't know what the truth is there. But anyway, a bunch of them from Taiwan for Ukraine to defend against Russia. The Hawk air defense system could be used to bolster Ukraine's counteroffensive. These systems can be placed 15 to 30 kilometers from the front line with a max missile range of 40 kilometers. And this would be really good to use exactly like Ukraine battle map suggests here, giving a coverage that extends behind the front lines, which pushes the Russian Air Force further back still. It would be great to get a whole load of these systems and into Ukraine. And this has been suggested by Trentelenko, talked about Hawk air defense systems doing this, but he talked about this back in, I remember I was reporting on that, I don't know what it was, September last year, whatever. 9 months later, finally happening. He's saying there are so many Hawk air defense systems around the world. All they need to do is just buy up a load of those and whack them in place and hook them all up, and you've got a really decent coverage of your skies. It's just frustrating that now in July 2023 that's happening. UK Defence Ministry has announced that they have now trained 18,000 Ukrainian infantry soldiers in the country so far. In 1 year, the UK has trained 18,000 Ukrainian volunteer infantrymen under the Operation Interflex training programme. The country's Defence Ministry reported on July the 15th. That is really impressive. 18,000. You add that together with those being trained elsewhere in Europe. And of course, it's not just UK trainers there. We've got Kiwis, Swedes, all sorts of other, wildfowl and vegetables. Obviously joking. All sorts of other nations helping with that. And it's really great that this is unifying NATO and allied countries to, working together to achieve a common goal. That's really great moving forward. These connections are going to solidify NATO's capabilities going forward, dealing with any new threat that pops up. Well, we're used to it now. NATO worked together, but they're working together even more and even better now than they ever have done. But you are just getting a number of Ukrainian troops being trained at least to a certain level. And that is, as I keep saying, an asymmetry with what's going on with Russia. Are the Russian mobilized troops getting any training that remotely resembles this? I doubt it. So therefore, the Ukrainians are eking out every advantage they can. So that's military aid. Now we're going on to a very small amount of geopolitical stuff. Just one thing to report today. Bulgarian president blames Ukraine for war. Now, he said this before. I never reported on this before, actually relatively recently. Bulgarian president Ruman Radev blasted Ukraine out. Was someone saying that he might not have, he's one of these presidents that doesn't have like loads of power, the way that the Bulgarian political system is set up, a bit like Petr Pavel in Czechia. He is much more of less of a power position, more of a head of state type thing. I don't know if that's the case, but he is very pro-Russian. He's blasted Ukraine while speaking to journalists on July the 14th, claiming that Kyiv insists on waging war. I don't know how you can say that. How you can possibly say that and keep a straight face. How you can say that Ukraine is the one waging war when they have been invaded. Where are the Russian soldiers now? They are in Ukraine. Right. Who waged war? On February the 24th, who waged war? Because it wasn't Ukraine that waged war. It just really annoys me. I'd love to sit that person down on national television and hammer home an argument, just really nail in. No, we're going to concentrate on this one point, and you are going to justify yourself, like properly justify yourself. And we ain't leaving. The cameras ain't getting turned off until we've come to a conclusion here. And we need to then go back and back and back. And what are you basing that on? And what's your axiom? Right, okay. Just because people arguing up here saying, "Oh, Ukraine waged war," and then no one challenges them, or they get away with just saying that. It's like, no, no, no. I wrote an article once on how reporters don't challenge enough. They often just report. So it's in their name, right? Oh, they're reporting their opinion. And the same with Vox Pops, like getting. And I know that's kind of their job is to right. What do people think? But sometimes I want reporters to do a little bit better job of challenging what people think. What do you think, sir? I think complete and utter nonsense. That's wonderful. Thanks for telling me you're complete and utter nonsense. Rather than saying, hang on, you do realise that doesn't make any sense because A, B, and C, right? And that what you've told me is utter BS. What do you think to that? Well, that's what I want reporters to do. Don't just report. Be a journalist. Be someone that is interacting with what you're listening to. Now I know that bringing loads of bias and stuff, but if someone gives you complete nonsense, like oh, we're listening to you because you believe you are an opinion and you believe the world is flat. Isn't that fantastic? Someone believes the world is flat rather than that's wonderful for having that opinion, but it's complete nonsense and I'm going to challenge you on this. And this is how it's not flat. Uh, we need some more of that, especially with political opinions. If journalists need to challenge politicians who come up with complete nonsense. Anyway, I wrote an article on that some years ago, but it just annoys me when politicians get away with like complete nonsense. And of course, I don't know the details of this interview, and I don't know what has taken place there, and whether it's just complete obsequious national reportage going on here, so that the Bulgarian president is not challenged by his own pet journalists and report media organizations. But anyway, Ukraine's embassy in Sofia pointed out that Russia is the one that invaded. Who knew? And Ukraine's goal is to have peace within its full territory. The embassy stated that narratives blaming Kiev are consistent with Russian propaganda. Yep, that'd be right. Bulgarian president be wrong. Anyway, thank you for listening. That's the end of today's videos. Sorry I split them into two, but as you can see, this would have gone over 50 minutes, probably because I'm ranting. Also, like my first video has already been restricted, I can see. So that's frustrating. So if I split it into two, then at least one half doesn't get restricted. Such is life. Anyway, really appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you in the Frontline update.